The Next Generation introduced a great starship trope that Star Trek has only used 3 times since. The world of Star Trek is full of starships, sleek vessels that warp across the galaxy, bridging cultures, solving crises, and occasionally engaging in the odd space battle. From the original NCC 1701 Enterprise to Discovery's Spore Drive experiment, the franchise has introduced countless technological and conceptual innovations. But there's one particular Starship-related trope that Star Trek, The Next Generation TNG introduced with a bang, one that felt so imaginative and fresh that you'd expect it to have become a franchise staple. And yet, it's been used only 3 times since. That trope? The Galaxy-class starship as a flying city. More than just a battleship or a research vessel, the USS Enterprise D introduced a compelling new idea in TNG. The starship as a floating home, a peaceful community in space complete with families, schoolrooms, leisure decks, and art installations. This bold vision of the future was a radical departure from the more militarized depiction of spacefaring life seen in the original series TOS, and it offered fertile storytelling ground that's barely been explored since. The Enterprise D, a starship for civilization, not just exploration. When Gene Roddenberry envisioned The Next Generation, he wanted to push Star Trek beyond the cold steel of the original 1960s Starship and into a more idealistic future. The Enterprise D was the physical embodiment of that dream. Designed by Andrew Probert and Rick Sternbach, this Galaxy-class behemoth was more than twice the length of Kirk's Enterprise and nearly 8 times the volume. But it wasn't just its size that mattered, it was what was inside. TNG's Enterprise featured living quarters for families, children in school under the guidance of teachers like Keiko O'Brien, and entire decks dedicated to recreation. There were botanical gardens, arboretums, restaurants, a bar run by Guinan, and even an art studio. Starfleet personnel weren't just on tour, they were living in space. This setup allowed the show to blend adventure of the week plots with slice-of-life storytelling. Episodes like Data's Day, The Bonding, and Disaster benefited tremendously from the ship's diverse civilian population. In Disaster, for example, we see Counselor Troy suddenly thrust into command while children are trapped with Worf in a turbolift, and Keiko O'Brien gives birth during a crisis. These plotlines wouldn't have been possible without the show's commitment to depicting the Enterprise as a living, breathing community. Why the trope worked so well? The idea of a flying city in space, essentially a multi-generational, self-sufficient colony hurtling through the stars, is one of science fiction's most enduring dreams. And TNG made it feel real. This approach offered several key benefits. Character development. Officers like Chief O'Brien or Dr. Crusher weren't just Starfleet drones, they were parents and spouse too. The idea that someone like Captain Picard could eventually bond with children, as seen in Family and Disaster, gave the character unexpected depth. Emotional stakes. Having families aboard raised the emotional cost of danger. It wasn't just about keeping the ship intact, it was about protecting people who weren't prepared for battle. World building. The Federation wasn't just a military alliance, it was a utopian civilization. The Enterprise D showcased the culture, values, and priorities of that society better than any speech. Despite all this richness, however, Star Trek has only leaned back into this flying city trope a handful of times since TNG went off the air. Trope usage #1. The USS Voyager partial attempt. Star Trek. Voyager flirted with the trope but never fully embraced it. When the titular ship was flung 70,000 light-years away into the Delta Quadrant, it immediately became clear that there were no families on board. Voyager was a smaller Intrepid-class ship meant for scientific missions, and while it carried civilians like Neelix and Kez, it lacked the social infrastructure of the Enterprise D. Still, Voyager did experiment with some elements of the trope. Over time, the ship became a home for its crew. There were occasional nods to recreational facilities, family-like bonds formed, and Naomi Wildman, the first child born aboard, added a sliver of the family dynamic. However, these were exceptions rather than the rule. In the end, Voyager was more of a submarine and space show, tight quarters, military hierarchy, and survival at the forefront. The sense of expansive community that defined the Enterprise D was notably missing. Trope usage #2 Star Trek Generations A Final Glimpse. The Flying City trope got one last send-off in Star Trek Generations, the TNG film that destroyed the Enterprise D. The movie notably featured the ship's civilian population evacuating before its saucer section crash-landed on Veridian 3. That sequence, with terrified families running through corridors as the ship shook apart, brought the unseen implications of the trope into full, harrowing view. It was a rare moment where the cost of Starfleet's idealism was made real. Families on a warship can mean genuine vulnerability. But it was also a farewell. After Generations, Star Trek would largely move away from the concept of starships as cities. Trope usage #3 The USS Cerritos in Lower Decks reinvention as comedy. Surprisingly, the closest successor to the Flying City trope comes not from live-action drama, but from Star Trek Lower Decks, the animated comedy series that satirizes the franchise while secretly respecting its core values. The USS Cerritos isn't as grand as the Enterprise D, but it is a functioning community. The show makes a point of exploring how people live, work, and party in the lower ranks of Starfleet. There's an emphasis on friendships, hobbies, personal drama, and even families. In Season 2's I, Excretus, we even get simulated slices of ship life gone awry, including civilians in distress. Lower Decks embraces the idea that a starship is not just a military vessel, but a floating society full of weirdos, bureaucrats, and dreamers. While its tone is irreverent, the heart of the galaxy-class philosophy beats strong here. Why has this trope been so rare since TNG? It's baffling that Star Trek hasn't leaned more into this vision. The reasons are likely a mix of storytelling practicality and cultural shifts. High stakes are harder with civilians. Writers often prefer stakes they can manage, and the presence of civilians complicates conflict scenarios. You can't just send families into a board battle. Changing audience expectations, modern audiences often want grittier, more action-driven narratives. Ships like the USS Discovery or La Sirena from Picard are sleek, tactical, and focused on a lean crew. There's little room for school teachers or jazz trios. Budget and logistics. More characters mean more sets, more actors, and more complexity. It's easier and cheaper to write for 10 officers on a tight mission than a full Starship community. Still, given how successful TNG was in making the Enterprise D feel like a home, both to its characters and its viewers, it feels like a missed opportunity to not revisit that structure more often. Imagine what could be. Imagine a modern Star Trek show that fully embraced the Galaxy-class lifestyle, updated for contemporary storytelling. Picture a ship where characters debate ethics over dinner with their kids, where teenage children rebel against the constraints of a Starfleet upbringing, or where a ship's social fabric is as vital to the story as any alien encounter. We could see diplomats, teachers, therapists, botanists, and cooks all contributing to a larger mission, not just one of exploration, but of proving that a diverse, peaceful society can thrive in the vast unknown. Such a series wouldn't just be about space, it would be about humanity in space. Star Trek is always best when it